Are you a fan of the finest up-and-coming filmmakers that Scotland and the rest of the world has to offer? Then look no further than the Glasgow Film Festival. Glasgow short film. That Scotland and the rest of the world has to offer? Then look no further than the Glasgow Film Festival. Shit. It's a bit tatty, isn't it? Look no further than the Glasgow Film... Oh no, Glasgow Short Film Festival. I'll do that again, but the list for... You told me that this was a trailer for the Glasgow Film Festival. I shouldn't be doing this. Glasgow Film Festival, yes. The Edinburgh Film Festival, a push. The Glasgow Short Film Festival. No, you listen to me. Just diddy wee films. Things about your granny or your drunk dad. Guaranteed there'll be some foreign animation that nobody understands. That'll be winning a prize. Don't you worry about that. Are you a fan of the finest up-and-coming filmmakers that Scotland and the rest of the world has to offer? Then look no further than the Glasgow Short Film Festival 2021. Give a lick of paint.
Hello, and welcome to the Mental Health on Screen panel. That trailer by James Price still gets me every time. I'm Hannah Curry. I am here as a former, I'm a director, mainly of films about mental health. I won the Audience Award at Glasgow Short Film Festival in 2019 with my film We Are All Here. About the suicide of a young Glasgow rapper, and then last year my film That Joke Isn't Funny Anymore about my uncle and his brain injury was featured at Glasgow Short Film Festival as well. So big fan of the festival, big fan of representing mental health on screen in ways that are not only challenging at times but also challenging stigma, but also opening conversation and sort of showing the range of experience that can exist within that realm. So I'm joined by three filmmakers whose films are all playing at Glasgow Short Film Festival right now. We've got Simone Pereira Hind. Oh damn, the last word. Simone Pereira Hind. Is that right?
Well done. Yes,
who's the writer of Consumed, which is shown in Scottish Competition 1. And we've got Rosie Barnes, the writer of Do No Harm. Give us a wave, Rosie. And that's playing in Scottish Competition 2. And we have Austin McCowan, who is one of the directors of Harmonic Spectrum, which is playing in Scottish Competition 3.
Hello.
Hello, everyone. So I know that not everyone will have had a chance to view all of the Scottish competitions yet, so they might not have seen your film. So I thought, first of all, we would introduce yourselves, your role in the film and kind of how it came about, just a wee bit about your film. So we'll do it in order of the competition. So we'll go with you first, Simone.
I'm Simone Pereira Hind. Well done. I am the writer of Consumed. So I adapted a short story by a brilliant writer called Sian Hughes, and it's on the subject of miscarriage. I think I'll leave it there.
Okay. And Rosie?
I'm the writer of Do No Harm, which we call our OCD heist thriller, which is a new short form that we've invented. And it's basically about a high-flying scientist who has OCD who breaks into a high-security facility to try and steal an out-of-date sandwich. And it's kind of based on personal experience, but maybe more about that later.
Thank you. And Austin?
Yeah, hello. So I'm Austin. I'm one of the two co-directors of Harmonic Spectrum. Will is over there. He is here. He's waving. There we go. Hello. Harmonic Spectrum is a short documentary about Sean, who is a musician, Edinburgh-based young musician who uses music to navigate life on the autistic spectrum. He was diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome as a young man, And the film kind of follows how he uses a collaborative relationship, or how a collaborative relationship helps to kind of allow him to kind of learn and redefine his perspective throughout lockdown, basically.
Thank you very much. So 3 very, very different films here. We have 2 fiction films and 1 documentary, and all kind of completely different in terms of where mental health comes into the fold. But I think we can weave together this conversation and really kind of have quite an open discussion about what comes with portraying mental health on screen, both the positive aspects and the challenges. So I think I'll start again. I'll come back to you, Simone, if that's okay. So this is based on a short story. It very heavily features miscarriage and grief, and I suppose the psychology of loss as well, which can be very, very complex. And I think, I mean, when I watched the film, it's a difficult film to watch, an absolutely incredible film, really, really beautifully performed and sensitively done. And I think one of my biggest takeaways from the film is that, you know, often when you're dealing with issues as serious as that you can, or you know, with especially with a woman's mental health and post miscarriage, it can be a really difficult balance to strike between kind of you know, the crazy woman and but my overall takeaway at the end was that I empathized wholeheartedly with the woman. I understood her. It made me really think about miscarriage and grief very, very deeply. So I suppose, could you talk a wee bit on was that a consideration, kind of striking that balance, and what drew you to the story and made you feel you needed to tell it?
I had been looking for some material. I wanted to make a short film, and when I was introduced to Sian's writing, I mean, it really kind of slapped me in the face. I felt incredibly engaged by the story. It is a very kind of close-up story about a woman going through a miscarriage, the very visceral representation of what that's like, and her emotions and her grief around it. I'm not going to talk about the end of the film, but it has quite a dramatic ending. And the filmmakers, we always felt very strongly that we didn't want people to feel that she is mad, whatever that means, throughout her journey of processing what is happening to her. I mean, I felt very strongly about it because I know so many women who have gone through miscarriage. I mean, the statistics are extraordinary when you think 1 in 3, 1 in 4 women, 1 in 3, 1 in 4 pregnancies go astray. Sorry, I'm talking rubbish, but they don't happen. They end in miscarriage. And I mean, people are talking about it more, but it's still an incredible taboo, I think. And of course, I've been thinking a huge amount about why this is. And I think on the one hand, society is uncomfortable looking at, hearing about the kind of visceral experience of miscarriage, and kind of embarrassed by women's bodies and the bloody messiness of it, frankly. And I think women going through the experience, I mean, something I read and heard about again and again were feelings of loneliness and humiliation, and this feeling of failure, of having failed at something that is supposedly natural and you know, a very basic function of our bodies. And I think it's those two elements coming together that mean that miscarriage is still this sort of embarrassing taboo that we don't talk about enough. And we really wanted to go there with our film and really kind of get in there. And I watched the film again before the panel this morning, and I'm incredibly proud of it, but I I'm amazed at how it moves me every time I watch it. And I think a great deal of that is down to brilliant performance from Shauna MacDonald, but it's also about Sean's brilliant writing in the first instance.
Yeah, absolutely. You should be proud of it. It's a wonderful film.
Thank you.
Really recommend it. So that's in Scottish Competition 1 for anybody who hasn't seen it yet. Rosie, we'll move on to you. So your film obviously strikes a very different tone from the ones. It's as you say, a OCD heist thriller, and has real elements of comedy in it. So can you speak a wee bit about how you came to this story? I know it is partially based on lived experience.
Yes, I broke into Heisekert. No, not quite like that. But yes. Basically, I should say OCD is obsessive compulsive disorder, because I'm always saying OCD like everyone knows what that is. And it's mainly associated in the mainstream media with people who are excessively tidy, or, lining up their pencil collections, all that kind of thing. Monica from Friends. There is a kind of media image of what OCD is, and that's not really most people's experience of it, or at least that's only maybe one part of most people's experience of it. So I kind of wanted to do something that seemed more authentic to me, and it did come from it was inspired by a personal experience, in that I ended up this is quite a few years ago, I'll point out, I'm not quite so bad now, but I ended up staking out a pottery class in order to steal a sponge. And I think I spent an entire weekend staking it out in my car. I lied to my boyfriend about where I was going. I was spending hours camped outside because I wanted to steal this sponge, because I decided this sponge had become contaminated. It was going to be used for the teacups. Someone was going to die. It was all going to be my fault. Blah, 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 blah. And I'd gotten into this whole thing about it. And I suppose with, comedy's a lot about perspective. When you're in it, it's like the biggest thing in the world. And then when you're out of it, you're looking at it going, what? And I think that's what Doug, the director, does so brilliantly with Ours. And I suppose I also wanted to put a bit of a note through for, a bit of a support for comedy as well, because I feel like the world we're in at the moment is kind of going down this very sonorous is the only word I can think of, earnest, that in order to be respectful about anything, you have to treat things with a particular tone, and that tone can't be comedic. And I think for me, I feel very comfortable presenting things about myself comedically, more comfortable in some ways than presenting things as, super emotional or vulnerable. Because although you may be super emotional and vulnerable, and that is in this film as well, there is a kind of, I think when you're wanting to present something yourself and you see it from a different perspective and you're showing it to a different person, comedy is able to be kind, actually. Comedy is able to engage you with characters, make you understand characters, draw you into characters. It doesn't have to be always a serious representation to be a respectful representation, in my view. And I wanted to present a very entertaining and fun film, as well as a film with some hope without giving too much away, but also really dealing with the fact it is a big anxiety struggle. I mean, the main character really does suffer, even though it's a comic film. And I think you can see that. And I suppose I wanted that kind of message, not that I'm being an activist about it, but, I wanted that message, particularly for younger people, I think, because we have got a bit of a mental health crisis and things like OCD are definitely on the rise. So I'll stop babbling. That's my answer.
Brilliant answer. I totally, loads to relate to there. So we'll circle back to some of it. I think, I recently made a film with somebody who lives with OCD, and she was very much on the same track to you in terms of how it is kind of treated generally in society. And I think the really interesting thing as well is that it can be used as in a kind of joke context quite a lot, or a flippant context. And one of the things I quite like about your film is it kind of takes back that ownership of the comedy. It's like I'll make the jokes.
Yeah.
My
jokes, my power, my funny.
So yeah, no, I really appreciated that about your film, and again, brilliant film, beautiful film, expertly cast by Simone as well in her other job. And I think that balance, again, the other thing that really resonates is the humour as a way into to a character to warm the audience to really kind of, you know, it's not always possible to use humour because it depends on obviously the seriousness of the subject matter and kind of you know, it's not always, what's the word?
Appropriate.
Appropriate, yeah.
Thanks, Simone. Appropriate. But it really does. I mean, I try to use humour a lot in my films to kind of give people a way in and give them something to, you know, and a wee bit of lightness amidst the darkness as well, which I also think that you do very well, Austin, and Will. In Harmonic Spectrum, I laughed out loud at that film. Especially the Seal Sanctuary bit, I love the humour of your main character, and I really finished up just wanting to be pals with him. So could you, first of all, I'm not go too far ahead, but could you tell me a wee bit about how you came to this character, this film, and why you made it?
Mm-hmm. Cool. Yeah, so Will and I met Sean about 2 years ago. We actually made another film about a venue that features quite heavily in Harmonic Spectrum called the Pianodrome, which is an amphitheatre made out of about 50 plus upcycled pianos, basically. And that venue became a real sanctuary for Sean because, as he says in the film, at some point it kind of gave him a way to pull himself out of a darker place that he was in before and meet this community of people that gave him a space where he felt comfortable, and he was able to play pianos all the time, which fit him to a T. We met Sean towards the end of making the short about the Pianodrome, and just kind of got on with him really well, and through kind of just being friends, we sort of eventually had the idea and spoke to him about whether we could make a short documentary about him. And it did tie in with the Bridging the Gap program at Scottish Documentary Institute. We were looking for a story that we could submit that we felt could be dealt with as a short documentary, and Sean fit the bill really well. So it was just a kind of natural, it felt very natural, and I think you're aware of the Bridging the Gap process a bit, Hannah, but it's quite amazing how much of the kind of key moments that happen in the film, or quite a lot of the getting the ball rolling, actually started in the development process for us. We were able to shoot things that found their way into the final cut quite naturally, and really allowed us to make a plan for understand how we were going to actually move forward without the kind of curveballs that COVID threw at us along the way. But yeah, we kind of just met Sean naturally, and I don't know, we're filmmakers, he's a musician, he hangs about in really cinematic looking spaces. It was kind of a matter of time
before he was the star of a film.
Yeah.
Fantastic. And what does well, I'll work backwards now. So what does he think about the film? I saw that your film has been endorsed by the National Autistic Society, which is brilliant. And I think one thing for me that really struck me was just how much of a positive portrayal it was. The whole idea that, you know, mental health does not define a person, that it's part of a person. That came through for me really strongly in your film. And as I said, I just, you know, my kind of biggest takeaway was just I wanted to be friends with the characters in the film at the end. And I think that is actually a difficult thing to do. At times I think it can be really tricky. It can be a tricky process to navigate, trying to you know, tackle those kind of mental health aspects, but also you know, make sure that the character shines through, the person shines through. So what was your kind of guiding light with that? What did you let him guide the process, or did you have kind of thoughts about how did that kind of unfold?
Yeah, so yeah, you mentioned the National Autistic Society, so that's kind of a conversation we've only started having quite recently, but we shared the film with them, and they really liked the kind of attitude. I think it's important to sort of say that, you know, autism spectrum disorder isn't defined as a mental health problem, but people who are on the autistic spectrum can often have other kind of mental health issues that can be kind of as a result of being on the autistic spectrum, and increased anxiety and things like that. But in itself, so we were always just aware that, you know, we're dealing with Sean, who is, you know, a vulnerable adult. We don't want to take advantage of him and as his friends in the first place. And as you know, as a documentary maker, you build relationships with your kind of contributors as friends, as, you know, quite often, you know, it's hard to separate the two things. And just throughout the process, I think we were listening to Sean's ideas. We would bring our own ideas, but it was generally quite a collaborative process. And one of the things I kind of mentioned in your first question, that a lot of the stuff we shot in that early development period with the Scottish Documentary Institute made it into the film. That was where we first realized that, you know, Sean told us, you know, he's more comfortable speaking in front of his piano. And we took him out to his hometown and went on a walk up in the woods and had a fire, and, you know, he was playing the didgeridoo to the moonlight, and it was like, you know, it was quite an interesting trip, but he wasn't really ready to open up and talk to us at that point, and he didn't feel comfortable. So when we kind of got back to Edinburgh, we said, look, let's sit down. How would you like to do it? And we ended up sitting with the piano in front so that he could speak to us while being able to work things out on the piano. And that's where we first identified that, you know, the piano is a real communication tool for him, and it helps him work things out in his brain as he's trying to describe them to you. So, because we are putting him on the spot a bit with questions, which he's not usually that keen on. He likes to kind of have a bit of time to think about it and formulate an answer before. So when you're kind of interviewing someone, it's a bit different for him to kind of just be natural. But the piano helped that. So things like that were a kind of natural evolution of just, you know, listening and feeling a connection to the person you're making a film about, and trying to work out how you can work together to tell their story, basically, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And on that note of collaboration then, so Simone and Rosie, you must have had to have incredible trust in your directors to bring your vision to life. Can you talk a wee bit on that process, how you navigated that and made sure that kind of all parties were happy with the direction that it was going in? Was that always an obvious kind of collaboration for you, or were there times where it was challenging?
For me, my collaboration with Karen was mostly very easy. And Karen brought a huge amount to the table for me. She had strong opinions on the script, and Karen is a very visual director. And probably our script was more wordy at the beginning. I hope she doesn't mind me saying she's dyslexic, and I think that's part of the reason why she's an incredibly visual person. But it felt as though we kind of lost more and more of the dialogue, and I thought that became a strength, actually, because it brought us into closer contact with the interiority of the lead character. And Karen had lots of visual ideas about how to portray what was going on for Faye, which I think work very well, those visual metaphors. I tried not to look at Sian's fantastic story. Once I'd started writing it as a screenplay, I tried to not go back to Sian's story because I didn't want to kind of just get confused by the whole thing. And of course, we were getting notes from our execs about the story along the way also. And yeah, I mean, this is my first go at screenwriting, and it was fascinating. And I was very interested in the process of, writing this story, being very happy with it, having to show it to other people and get their feedback, and the incredible kind of resistance I felt initially to having to change anything. Rosie, I don't know, you probably know all about this because you're a much more experienced writer. But when I kind of stopped thinking, oh, they don't like this because it's not good enough, and it stopped being a kind of ego thing, and started allowing other people's opinions in and notes, I found that absolutely brilliant. It was an incredible collaboration between me, Karen, Penny, our producer, you know, listening to what other people had to say, trying to work out what was working in the script and what wasn't, and just being open to that was a huge learning for me. And actually, you know, one of the best things for me about working on this film was the collaboration and what I learned from that. Yeah.
Fab. Yeah, I think it's really interesting you mentioned execs and comics, because I think that's something that definitely comes it comes up a lot, and especially if you're dealing with mental health issues or mental health related issues, then it can be a really tricky relationship to navigate when you kind of have the sense that you are making something to essentially entertain, but you know, for people to watch, versus, you know, this incredible responsibility that you feel to get it right. And that is definitely something that in every film I've made, I've felt that and really kind of carried it. But I think you're right. I think at times what I have learned is that it's so important to be honest and to speak up for the, you know, to fight the battles that you know that you need to fight.
Yeah, absolutely.
But also know when to choose your battles, essentially, know when to come back and to respect that actually it might make your film better or more accessible. But yeah, it's a tough one, definitely.
I think also, like, there's a sort of interesting link because with the documentary and the fiction, because you've talked about building trust with a character, a real person who's got to be, you know, they've got to exposing vulnerabilities really in front of a camera. I mean, that's a huge piece of trust to build. And I suppose maybe in a smaller way, but in a similar sort of way, if you're a writer who has experience, you know, that's your vulnerable thing, you also have to have that relationship built up with your team. And so I suppose what Simone's talking about in terms of the relationship with, I mean, for me, I think the relationship with the director is absolutely key for me in terms of, I mean, it's a brilliant team, but the person you probably are working closest to all the time is the director. And I can't fault Doug. He's just, you know, I mean, everyone who knows Doug knows he's the nicest person in the world, which is always helpful. But I had this sort of core of an idea at the beginning, and I was quite reluctant. It was actually a second idea I'd shoved into the SFT, and I was quite reluctant to put it in because it was personal and it was quite rough. And it was I had this other much more kind of tidied up idea that I was kind of, and then I just thought there was something in it. And I was like, you know, what should I do with this? And I'd met Doug a few times and I didn't know him very well, but I loved his previous shorts. He'd done some shorts with Josie Long, and they're very natural, very sensitive. I think it's that thing. There's something kind and sensitive in his directing, and when you meet him, is really nice. I just thought he just seemed right for it, and I sort of threw it at him kind of like a few days before or something, and he kind of immediately got back, and we kind of like worked it out. And from the very beginning, I'd say it was both of our projects in a quite a big way. Like he's completely, it was a very collaborative process altogether, and I think that's really important because, as Simone will know, and Austin, you know, you end up under huge amounts of pressure further down the line, or at least I did. You know, there's so many people giving you notes. Everybody wants it to be good. You know, there's so much riding on it. Everybody's like putting in so much time and effort, and there's never enough money, and you know, all this kind of thing. It becomes quite pressure. And I think at that point, it's quite easy to, with any film or any story, lose that central thing that's the most important thing. And I suppose I saw my task as being to, I knew no one else could do it in a way, really have my eye on the OCD aspects, and that I felt that they were at least authentic to me. And that was, you know, and Doug was so brilliant at that. Like if ever I brought up something about that, you know, because he's probably like, oh no, again, you know, but it gets to the point where even tiny subtle things can actually be authentic or inauthentic, and it can be quite hard to explain, and particularly in a development process where everything's very cause effect, very logical. If you're dealing with somebody who's just very illogical or has a mental health issue, they're not necessarily going to fit into beautiful story structures. They're not going to fit into cause and effect in a way that mainstream film encourages, you know. So it's, how do you hold on to that? How do you make an audience understand that? You know, how do you go through the development process, clinging on to something that's quite hard for a lot of people to understand? You know, it's quite, I feel I've rambled on far too much, but I just have to say that Doug was terrific, whole team was terrific, but I think creating that kind of trust so that you just really feel you can be open with the other person is the most crucial thing of all with anything like that. And I imagine that goes for documentary, you know, 100 timefold, really.
Yeah.
I think any personal story you're telling, it sounds like, you know, I'm just interested when you said that there, like how your relationship with Doug was obviously really good, Rosie, but how close were you on set in the actual shooting, and were there any things that were more adaptive to like seeing them visually, where you kind of consulted as to your own kind of experience and stuff?
That's interesting, because I was totally banned from set, and I totally banned. And I think in retrospect that was completely right, because I would have been I was so anxious about all sorts of issues that really weren't anything to do with the script at that point, that I think, you know, various health and safety concerns, monitoring everybody's, you know, I mean, the OTD would come out big time. So yeah, banned. And I think they were totally right. But the one thing they did do was, right during the shoot, I was rewriting. And I actually loved that, because it came, you know, as soon as, you know, there would be changes of location, there were changes of, you know, suddenly seeing the opportunities in certain locations and certain things that had come to light on the shoot. And Doug would go, you know, can you redo this with, you know, this and this and this? And I go, yeah, great. And I absolutely loved that. I loved the spontaneousness of it. I loved the kind of, I've had a bit of a theatre background. I love that sort of liveness of that. So we were in communication the entire time. Yeah, but nowhere near any of the people that I could disturb, I think. Right decision.
Rosie, about mental health not necessarily fitting into these kind of neat storytelling structures, because I think there is a sort of there's a balance there, isn't there, about, like, you know, how much catching up to the kind of standard structures or tropes have to do with the human experience of mental health, and you know, where do we need to kind of fit in to still make a story for an audience that really resonates and makes sense. But I think that's a really interesting point. I haven't actually thought about it in that way before, so thank you for that. I've got some questions from the floor, and I just want to say, if anybody does want to, we're here till 12:30, so if anyone has a question, you can post it to Glasgow Short on Twitter, or you can post it underneath our Facebook video and it'll get fed through to us here. So Heather has asked, can Austin speak to using humour to present mental health in a more positive and accessible way creatively? Is that a particular challenge for documentary?
Thanks for the question. It's almost like you make that decision early on when you sort of choose your story, in a way, because it would have been impossible to make a film with Sean, about Sean, that didn't have humor in it, because, you know, he's a funny guy and he's an energetic guy, and I think it just helps to, yeah, I think we kind of consciously knew we wanted to keep it in there because we're trying to stay true to his character, but also we didn't ever plan to make a film that was about autism, or as much as it was about someone with the challenge. You know, it kind of comes back to that sort of classic kind of story structures and narrative. It's like, we knew when we met Sean, he has a challenge and he is using music to kind of overcome this challenge. And there were natural kind of phenomenons, well, the pandemic, that kind of threw additional challenges in his path. But there was always going to be humor from the outset, I think, in kind of just working with someone like Sean, and on other films that we make as well. We're making another documentary that deals with, you know, coming to terms with your mortality through humor. And yeah, there is it does just feel like a natural way to explore these kind of subjects, because they give audiences that kind of universal thing that everyone that can relate to, is that, you know, we all love to laugh, and when you laugh, you let your guard down a little bit, and I think you're able to kind of understand things and feel things a little bit more. So yeah.
Thank you. Do you have anything to add to that, Rosie, on the subject of humour? to access?
Humor's very important to me, and having seen the other films, I mean, I love. We're not talking enough about your film. Actually, I know it's not showing, but it's that joke isn't funny anymore. I love that. I love that film. I know. I mean, I've heard you were going to be chairing this. I was like, oh my god. I love the balance of humor and the way it moved, drew you in, but also took you into quite a tragic situation, and you cared hugely about the characters. I think that the humor side, though, is also about perspective in terms of public and private. So it's not necessarily not just not appropriate for some subjects. I think it could be. It's just that what are we exploring? I mean, for example, with Simone's film, it's such a very private and personal experience that she's exploring that I don't think humor plays any part particularly in that. Whereas my film and Austin's is much more about how a character is relating to the outside world and balancing that off with their personal experience. So they could be going through something personally, but it's that contrast between, you're trying to how you're maintaining your public your public self and versus your private self. And I think when it comes to the public self, there's a lot of humor to be mined from that, and that is something that if you are struggling with something there, well, I mean, obviously it depends on what it is you're struggling with, but I suppose I still think it's I'll start again. OCD is something that is really awful for people but has very humorous aspects when you look at it, and you can also present it to the world and to yourself humorously in retrospect, but it sort of depends where you are in it. I mean, there are people who are so bad that it's completely destroyed their lives, so I don't think it should necessarily be trivialized just because it has funny aspects to it. But at the same time, as a person who has something, do you want, how do you negotiate the world? How do you want to present yourself? And humor is also a powerful thing. It's like you said, whose jokes? My jokes. I can make my jokes. It's my jokes about, it's not you joking at me. It's me sharing my joke with you. And that's quite a different thing, and quite an empowering thing. And I don't think we talk enough about that. I think our culture is getting a bit literal sometimes. And I think we should be, more able to realize there are different sorts of humor. There are different ways of doing things with different tones. It doesn't necessarily mean it's disrespectful. It can be, but it doesn't have to be. No.
I think the amazing things about short films, it really allows you to explore that territory and the different ways in which you can. I think that short films really do kind of lead the way on representation and mental health. I think, mainstream media, we quite often see portrayals which don't do much to help challenge stigma or change perceptions, and are kind of a very narrow-minded view of what it is to have a mental health condition or a learning disability, or I guess on that, what are your kind of thoughts? What was your hopes for your film and the way that it would be received by audiences? Each film probably has a kind of core audience that might have a direct interest in the subject, and then a kind of wider audience who will probably learn a thing or two from the film. So, but what was your kind of, I mean, for me as a director, I'm kind of constantly thinking about my audience, which is quite debilitating at times. But yeah, did you have a thought about how you'd want it to be received, and how is it being received? I think this is the first time that some of them have screened, so maybe this is quite early. But Simone, do you want to start with that?
I feel really passionate about our film, really strongly about portraying our lead character in this very kind of deeply emotional way, which I think we don't see very often. It's been interesting thinking about this Q&A and thinking about my film, and it's got me digging more deeply into a film I'm trying to write at the moment, and trying to work out what it is that I want to do as a screenwriter. And I realized that I'm really keen to write about women in their more messy, angry, visceral side to women, because I think, we have such a long history of being portrayed as nice ladies that I can hardly stand it. And things are changing. If you look at something like Promising Young Woman, I think that's a great breakout film. I hope that women who have gone through the experience of miscarriage will see the film. Mm-hmm. And I'm nervous about that as well. But I really hope that they will feel what I feel about the character, which is that the actions that she takes are incredibly logical in her own mind. She's doing everything she can to protect her baby, and she's going through a deep sense of grief. She's not finding a way to express it, but she is expressing her grief very deeply. And that what she does is very logical in her own mind. And I hope people will understand her and empathize with her, because I really do. I think what she does, I can understand her. I feel like I could imagine being her. That's what I would like the audience to do. And of course, this has been our world premiere, so we've been desperate to show the film to people. And I'm getting a very positive response to it, but it'd be lovely for people who don't know me. I'd love to know what people really feel about it.
Excellent. I've got some questions again from the floor, but is there anything that you, Rosie or Austin, want to add to that last question before we move on? No. Okay.
Well, I suppose the only thing that I'd say is I think I said already about these mainstream depictions of OCD in quite a sort of trivial way, or people talking about it online and they're just talking about being neat and tidy. Oh, I'm very OCD, I'm a bit this, I'm a bit that. And some people get very offended by that. I don't particularly get offended by that, but I think it's a misunderstanding. And the other side of it is I researched short films dealing with it before doing this project. And so many of them were so miserable and so hopeless. And I just thought, I don't want to watch that. As somebody who has it, I don't want to watch that. And it didn't feel like, yes, there are some terrible cases, but, a lot of people, it's a thing that they struggle with and it goes up and down and you have really bad times. But, there is help, there is treatment, and I think one of the biggest things I wanted to get across, and I think this maybe goes between all of our films to some extent, is the concept of shame. And this is also something that was quite important about today. I don't talk about this in public at all. And I do talk to my friends, in which case I joke with them about it. So today was quite a big issue for me because I'm live on the internet saying I've got this problem and, it's quite a vulnerable thing. And I thought, I don't really want to do that. And I thought, but if I'm not going to do that, then what's the point of the film that I've just made, which is basically she could stop this whole ridiculous succession of idiocy that she's going down, that's getting worse and worse and worse for her, if she could just admit that she has some issue. If she could just reach out to somebody and say, actually, I've got a bit of an issue. I've got a problem here, and start that process of getting a bit of help. That's all that needs to happen in my film, in a sense. And it's getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and it's all about shame. The reason it's very hard to talk about, and I think that relates to all of our films hugely, and it's such a non-discussed issue that there's a lot about how we have to destigmatize and but it's still a very difficult personal thing to sort of to say to people you have this thing, and and how people react to that. And you're sort of, I'm now a bit tongue-tied unusually, because that is a very difficult thing to me to talk about. And I suppose what I wanted to also say was that for me it was a very important thing that my team, and I should have mentioned Alicia as well, who's been wonderful Alicia Makijewska, the producer, that I don't think I could have done this film without going through that process and with that team, because I sort of almost needed some people to force me to be a bit vulnerable, because, you know, I don't want to be vulnerable. That's almost like why I, you know, so although it's a genre thing, and although it's a bit fun, and although it's entertaining, you know, the character does kind of go there, and that's incredibly difficult for someone like me. And so the answer to the question is, I want young people to see it, and I want young people to watch it and enjoy it, relate to her. It doesn't have to be about OCD at all. It can just be about anxiety. Anyone with an anxiety condition can look at that film and go, I can admit to this. You know, I reach out to someone. There is stuff that can be done about it. I don't have to, you know, allow this to build up and up and up on my own. And it doesn't have to be a negative ending. You know, that's all. It's simple, but hopeful.
I totally relate to that. I think if you have lived experience of mental health, it's a kind of constant challenge about challenging stigma and how much of your own story to share and how vulnerable that can make you feel. And I've kind of become accidentally a bit of a spokesperson, you know, about mental health, but then in the process have revealed really personal things, and I wake up the next morning like with something on Twitter, and I'm just like, oh, what did I do that for? Why did I tell everybody that I had you know, that I have anxiety? Or because you think, you know, that you're going to be undermined, because society kind of expects everybody to be okay and operating full function, and it really is difficult. And I think the other difficult thing about it is once you kind of become that voice, that people sort of expect that you're just over the issue, and that you're a voice on this who doesn't actually, whereas often quite a lot of the time you are still grappling with that in everyday life, and it can be quite tricky. So some days you'll be on and totally able to talk about it, and some days you'll be off and not able to, and you know, people won't always know where they're going to find you. So thank you for saying that. You actually you answered one of the questions that had been asked, which was, did you look at other depictions of OCD on screen? And that question was for Simone as well, about, did you look at other depictions of miscarriage on screen? Did that inform how you wrote the film?
I didn't, and I wasn't aware of any, interestingly. It's only since making the film, someone told me the other day about an animation, which sounds really interesting, that I want to go back to. So no, I wasn't able to find, maybe I didn't look hard enough, but it's not something that I've seen depicted very much at all.
Yeah.
It's you know, kind of swept away quite quickly, I would say.
Absolutely.
It's interesting that the Vanessa Kirby film Pieces of a Woman has just come out, or is coming out, which is a different film, but again, it's a very in-your-face portrayal of a woman going through a difficult birth experience. So I think these stories are being told more and more now, which is a great thing. I had lots of questions for you documentary makers, actually, by the way, but maybe you should be honest. No, I had questions about whether you felt that you ought to give your films a happy ending, a positive ending, which is something that Rosie touched on. And I was also interested in whether your subjects have any say in the final film. How do you manage that? Sorry, I don't know why I'm taking over the question asking, but I was really curious.
Not at all. Personally, for me, the hopeful ending, kind of, yes. I think in That Joke Isn't Funny Anymore, it's a very sort of ambiguous ending. Yeah. You know, about the sort of sense that life is just going to keep going on in this way, and that there isn't really a happy ending when you're living with chronic illness, or you just kind of get used to it. But as for involving the subjects, no, I think that could potentially become quite complex, maybe almost for the same reasons that Rosie's banned from the studio floor. I think the person I think it takes that distance of a filmmaker to be able to, you know, the way I always see it is like, I will find somebody or some story that is amazing, or that is just totally strikes me as out of this world, and then it's kind of my job to show other people why I think this person is amazing, or what is so. But what I do, and this is something I'm kind of trying to get better at, is because I've learned the hard way bit, is really have an open discussion with the contributor at the start about what they're kind of getting into, what my intentions are, about trust, and it's funny because one of my mentors says that you shouldn't ask contributors to trust you, because how can they really when they don't know you, and they might have issues with that, but at least to set your intentions and to sort of say, this is what I'm trying to do, and to really follow that to the letter. And I think that's where it does become tricky if you have execs who might say, oh, like, be cool to do that, or oh no, let's, and you kind of think, oh, this is a person at the centre of this. But I'll always be fighting. I always fight for the contributors, but within reason. I do also understand that we need to tell their story in a way that people are going to be able to relate to and access, and that's where the kind of filmmaking part comes in. But I always think it's a funny thing to try and fit somebody's real life story into a story, a neat story. But I do like to think that there is hope. I think it's all we really have. So even in the most negative, kind of difficult portrayals, I think that we need a wee shining light somewhere, to be able to sort of cope with it. Or maybe that's just me. What about you, Austin? I have 2 more questions, by the way. You're on mute, Austin. I've got 2 more questions as well. So
all right. I'm off mute. I think what you were saying, obviously, about wanting to be as open as possible at the start of the process, as I know you are, we're kind of at the beginnings of our documentary making journeys. We've made a few films, but it's hard to learn that. You look on that kind of retrospectively, like, of course it would have been easier, and then there's an element of that which you never know what is going to get thrown up in the process as well. So it's almost impossible to do. Like, for example, COVID is a completely out there. Nobody expected that to happen, and with Sean it was quite challenging on this project, because we gave him a camera and we tried to encourage him to film himself, but there was also he was having his own difficulties in his own he was going through his own lockdown, and that was having its own profound effect on everybody. And I think in terms of what you were saying about the hopeful ending, and it's almost like you want to, when you're making a film about someone, yes, you kind of you are that outside perspective, and you're helping to show them what is there. And when you make a film that's very, character driven, it's a personal process. You've got really, a real relationship with the person you're making the film with. You're not going to just I don't know. There is a certain, you expose things along the way, but you don't want to end it on a kind of downbeat note, or like a degrading note, or you are kind of you are trusted along the way, and you kind of have to, you can't abuse that trust. Obviously it doesn't mean that you just get is that your parcel? Yeah. So yeah, I think it's just so far I feel like with Harmonic Spectrum as well, we kind of ended up with quite a hopeful message at the end of the film, and actually kind of speaking to what the previous question was about audience, something Sean touches on is that every person on the autistic spectrum is different. It is a spectrum, and you shouldn't judge your own journey, you shouldn't compare it to anybody else's. And I think that's kind of what we want to show people with Harmonic Spectrum, is that this is one person's story. This is Sean. He's on the autistic spectrum, and this is what he does. It doesn't mean you have to do the same thing, but it is just to sort of encourage people to embrace the thing that they are, passionate about, good at, and develop that, and just show people another side of one person's journey, basically. There's a really good film actually on the iPlayer at the moment by Charlie Russell called Chris Packham, Asperger's and Me, which again is like a really just an interesting representation of autism on screen. So I would recommend that. It's only available for like 10 more days.
Also, your film, I found it just really spoke to me about so many other issues as well. I mean, I think that's the other thing. I mean, a film involving a character or somebody who has a a mental health struggle of some kind. It doesn't have to just be about that. It can be about something else. And I think your film had loads of themes about creativity, the role of creativity. Like, I find it really moving, actually, as a the whole thing about whether you're doing things creatively for yourself, and that can be a form of expression, but then how there's a barrier when you come up against the business side of it, and how that's a completely different world, and how you're balancing those two things. And it's sort of very profound things that were said about, I think he says something like, it's about being in a bubble, and then he says something like, the bubble is the curse. And I just thought these things are a spectrum, but at the same time, anyone can relate to that. I found it incredibly moving. It didn't just make me laugh, but I felt very moved by it. And the message at the end, I felt like it was speaking to me directly. No, but you know what I mean. I think with all these films are not just about looking at the one issue. That there's other issues with a character who is exploring, who has these. There's a character with an issue, with a mental health issue, but there's other themes going on in all these films, and I think that's what I find exciting as well. We shouldn't have to just focus in on, like, there's no room for anything else, I mean, again, in Hannah's, your film, you about your uncle, the relationship with, the aunt is such a huge character in that, and not just about the character who's struggling with the issue, but the relationship of the people around, and all that's incredibly powerful. And I think that speaks to everyone about every relationship as well. So it's all universal. It's the challenge of how you make a very specific experience or a very specific mindset universal.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's sometimes those wee subtleties in somebody's life that make it so universal and relatable. And I think that's one thing that comes into documentaries. Often you're filming, you're contributing, and they're like, why do you want to see this? Why do you want to, I don't really get this. Why they never really understand. But it's always those wee kind of idiosyncrasies that people can relate to. So I've had my 5-minute warning 2 minutes ago, so we've got 3 minutes left. And a couple of questions, I do think that these have kind of been answered. I forgot to thank Daniel for his question to Simone and Rosie about the depictions of miscarriage and OCD on screen. We have 2 questions for Austin, which I'm sure you can answer in one. Julie would like to know about the balance of subject, agency, vs director vision on what they want to create, which I think we've touched on a wee bit. Oh God, my parcel. And Karen would like to know... answer that one first.
It's the dog's theme coming through.
I sort of didn't quite get it. I was a bit distracted. The subject vis-a-vis creative expression. So
sorry.
You got it. I hope it's important.
Sorry.
I kind of missed it. It was all a bit chaotic.
Oh, sorry. Right. Okay. Well, I think we've got 2 minutes. The balance of subject, agency, vs director vision on what you want to create. And further to that, Karen is asking, do you think autism is being represented more or should be on screen in British cinema as is being done in Hollywood? Which is a controversial one, actually, because I think Sia's film about autism... Yeah,
that's not getting good responses, is it? No. I think, the kind of part of that collaborative relationship is what Sean wants and what we want, but what we talked about earlier is we are the filmmakers, we are removed from the story, but at the same time he was creating music, he was creating things, and he knows, we have to be there when we want to film things, and he lets us know when he's doing things. So it's just a symbiotic relationship. One can't happen without the other, but at the end of the day, we are the filmmakers, and there was a lot more material than ended up in the film, so we are the storytellers in that way. And there's discussion along that journey, but at the end of the day, I think the filmmaker comes with the vision, and it's just a process. Yeah.
And do you think autism is being represented more?
So there's a really good film that was at Sundance in 2020 called The Reason I Jump, which is about non-verbal autistic people, and it has a beautiful, it's by Jerry Rothwell, I think, and it has a really beautiful approach to understanding the kind of audio-visual experience of autistic people in cinema, which is a really novel way to kind of allow other people, neurotypical people, to try and experience that, try and convey that to people. So I think that in films like Asperger's and Me with Chris Packham that I mentioned earlier are creating a more diverse portrayal of autism. And I think it's Sia's film. The big issue there is that they've used kind of a non-neurotypical actor to play someone with a neurodiverse condition, which just throws up kind of a few questions about representation. But yeah, I think it's getting better. But.
Good, nice one. Okay, I'm allowed to run over just by 5 minutes. So last question would be, what is everybody working on next? Is there any other projects on the horizon? And any final comments? I didn't even get through half of my questions. So if you feel that there's something that you wanted to say that you didn't get the opportunity to say, then now is your chance. So we'll start with you, Simone.
I can't think of anything. I've still got more questions for you guys, but not for me. Yeah, I am trying to write a feature film. I'm a little bit stuck. I'm about a third of the way through it, but actually, honestly, through going through this process and looking at our film again and talking about it, I feel like that's possibly unlocked a few things for me in terms of what it is the film is going to be about. I think that's what's been puzzling me. It's been too many elements flying around in my head. So yeah, but I'm not rushing myself on that. I have this quite demanding day job I do as well. But also I just think I will write that in the time, it will happen when it happens.
Yeah, absolutely. We're all familiar with that feeling of having a million things in our head. Sometimes it is better to just give it the distance and
yeah,
those moments where it's like 4 a.m. and you're like, I know what I need to do.
Exactly.
Yeah, I'm always waiting for those. And Rosie?
I've got a kind of crazy project, which Simone knows about, which is a sort of mother and daughter adventure story through the internet, social media, everything, like fantasy worlds. It's enormous but doable and completely low budget, I promise. And basically that's what I'm working on and quite excited about. And I'm working on another project, co-writing with a friend actually, which is dealing with mental health issues and has the main character is actually a hoarder, which I'm quite interested in. So that's quite early stages, but yeah. So that's what I'm doing at the moment.
Fantastic, thank you. And Austin?
Yeah, so Will and I are actually making our first feature documentary at the moment with support from Screen Scotland and BBC Scotland. So we've been making it for about just over 2 years, 2 years, 3 months and 19 days. But that's I kind of mentioned it earlier. It's called Long Live My Happy Head, and it's about a Scottish comic book artist with an incurable brain tumor who's creating a comic about his experience of living with brain cancer. But it also tackles he has a long distance partner who lives in the States, and it's kind of about how they come to terms with his kind of closeness to his mortality. And COVID is in the middle of it, which is really great. It's actually, we're fairly happy with the way we've managed to be able to keep telling the story, because Gordon, who is the main protagonist of the film, he actually lives just kind of 10 minutes down the road from us. So we've been able to film through his windows basically, and kind of keep capturing things as they've been happening. But that should be completed this year. So yeah, keep an eye out for that.
Fantastic. I can't wait to see all these projects come to fruition. And for everybody watching, you heard it here first. Before these people hit the big time, you can watch their amazing short films at Glasgow Short Film Festival. So Simone's film Consumed is in Scottish Competition 1. Rosie's film Do No Harm is in Scottish Competition 2. And Austin's film, what's your second name again, Austin? Austin's film and Will's film Harmonic Spectrum is in Scottish Competition 3. You can watch my films on the iPlayer, That Joke Isn't Funny Anymore, and Lumo Too Young to Die, and Not Your Average Influencers. And thank you so much to Glasgow Short, as ever, for supporting new filmmakers, making these kind of chats possible. I have had a lovely time, and it's been great to meet you all, and I could go on talking all day, but we're not allowed to.
Thank you, Hannah.
Thank you so much, Hannah.
Thank you. Thanks all of you. Cheers.
Thanks, everyone.
Sorry about the dog.